I think my interest in music initially, as far back as I can remember, started when I was very young, back to the time that I even had a memory, I think. I've always loved music, and in interviews I've talked before about the fact that my parents had bought me a record player when I was very young, a Fisher Price one, a kid's record player, and I used to listen to the nursery rhymes and those types of things. And it was the best Christmas gift I ever had. And I would listen to Disney music a lot from the cartoons and animated movies that they made. I think as I got older, my parents always had music in the house and would listen to things like Simon and Garfunkel, a lot of Gordon Lightfoot. I kind of grew up listening to folk music, some Beach Boys and some Elvis Presley, that kind of music. It was always very melodic, a lot of harmonies, so I grew up really liking that. I remember, in fact, at church at one point, we were sitting behind a woman who would always sing an alto line, and I remember being very small and listening to her sing, and I asked my mom, I said, what is she doing? Because she's singing along, but what she's singing is different than what everyone else is singing, but it sounds, somehow it blends. And that was kind of, I remember being very clued into harmony and melody as a kid. I would always kind of mess around on my grandmother's piano, try to play notes, and was always kind of drawn to it. I have uncles who are really talented musically, piano players, and my dad also is a musician. He's a fantastic guitarist, and he actually wrote some of his own music, and he would write folk songs and lyrics and everything. He's a singer as well. So I think that the music aspect of my life comes from, maybe genetically, it's inside me from my own family members and their interest in music, but I've always had a real fascination and always wanted to be involved with music. I remember when I got into high school, I was a DJ. I was kind of the guy that people would come to and say, oh, you know, what's the newest thing? And I always go to, in San Bernardino in California, where kind of in the area where I grew up, around that area, I would always go to the DJ stores and get the newest music and the, particularly dance music, which became a strong influence for me. So, and then eventually I learned I kind of am self-taught on the piano. So I think as far as my interest in music started at a very early age and continued throughout. With the Sleepthief project, some of the songs for the first album were actually were written years before, just melodic ideas that I had, and eventually I bought a keyboard, started writing music, and had a way to record it, and that progressively led to working on the albums, the first album, and then I also, I took a theory class, I think, in college. I took a piano class just to understand fundamental chord relation and things like that. But that was never really, learning other people's music was never especially interesting to me, just because I wanted to write my own music, and I have a great appreciation for music and other artists' work and composers, but I was always more interested in writing my own stuff. I would say that the influences on me musically are really broad. As I mentioned, when I was young, listening to kind of folk music, and when I grew a little bit older, I remember it's kind of funny, the first music I actually purchased were a couple 45 records, and I think I bought Earth, Wind & Fire, Let's Groove, which I loved when I was a kid, a really young kid, and I bought Thomas Dolby, She Blinded Me with Science, and I think, embarrassingly enough, I bought Mr. Roboto by Styx. So, it was the 80s, what could you say? So initially I was into that. I was very much into, as a kid, listening to music. We were into like Funky Town. I remember that song being a big influence on me. I love that. And then as I got older, I was very much into, growing up in Southern California, we had kind of, a nice cross-section of different styles of music that radio stations would play. And I remember K-Rock, and they would play stuff like, Yaz, big influence on me, Vince Clarke, I love his work, and anything that was kind of new wave and melodic. I loved synthesizers, was influenced by stuff like Yazoo, obviously Aha, who I've mentioned in other interviews, who are still a great band, one of my favorite bands. In fact, their first album, I think, is one of my top 10 albums of all time, Hunting High and Low. I was influenced by like Erasure, New Order, Trans-X, Living on Video, which I've mentioned elsewhere. So that whole sound, I loved Blondie, and Dead or Alive, things like that. So kind of the dance, upbeat synth music, but I also liked general pop music too. I mean, as cheesy as it sounds, I mean, I was really liked stuff like, I thought Phil Collins was great. I liked, I liked the Xanadu soundtrack, embarrassed enough to say it. It's good for skating, but but I really liked pop music in general in the 80s, and then as the later 80s came around, I really started getting into freestyle, what was called freestyle music, and it originated kind of on the East Coast. Seabank, One More Shot, which was a big kind of underground club song, and a watershed song for me was Shannon's Let the Music Play, which I was a massive fan of. That first album that had Let the Music Play and Give Me Tonight, Sweet Somebody. It was produced by Mark Leggett and Chris Barbosa, who I followed their careers. Even to this day, I love their music. But I was just blown away by the sounds that they were able to get, the beats that they created, which are still today some of the best dance beats. I kind of got into freestyle music, and that movement actually also had a Floridian kind of Miami sound as well. Groups like Expose, I think Stevie B, there were groups like Sequel, The Voice in Fashion, and then there was also an LA aspect of that, which was stuff like Stacy Q and Bardot. The LA side of it was much more, the freestyle music coming out of Los Angeles was a little more pop and disco-y, maybe. It wasn't as hard and dark as some of the New York and particularly New York freestyle music, but that really influenced me for a long time. I bought a lot of 12-inch music that I was a DJ in high school. All of that was a lot of synth music as well. It was a lot of keyboard and programming based. So my influence is kind of interesting because I listened to electronic, what you could call electronic music, a lot, but I also appreciated real instrumentation as well. And then I would probably say, obviously, kind of that my taste in music really took a major change in direction when I first bought Watermark, Enya's Watermark, which I have mentioned in other interviews I've done. And that particular album, I remember buying it at this old DJ store that I mentioned that I would go to, and someone had put it in a bargain used bin. Orinoco Flow had just come out, and I had heard it a few times, and I thought it was just really a strange song. I didn't know what to think of it. It didn't sound like anything else I'd heard, and I thought it was really beautiful, but very weird for a radio song. And I went in, picked up Watermark, and it was a cassette tape. I took it home, and I remember going, oh, this is that girl that sings that really strange song. And I put that tape in, and I remember just literally sitting on my bed and going, I can't believe that this music exists. It was kind of the most perfect music that I had ever heard, and it was obviously, ethereal. You could describe it as that. It was very ethnic. It had a Celtic element, really haunted and kind of ghostly. But from that point on, I kind of directionally, I started listening to world music and looking at Celtic music and other ethnic music, some New Age music, and so that became a very strong influence as well. And I also got into classical music a lot more, started listening to probably Schubert's my favorite composer as far as symphonic composer, and I would listen to Schubert and also Beethoven, Bach, Handel, anything from the Baroque period I loved because of the complex melodies, and a lot of early, what they call early Christian music, the masses like Josquin and some of the early composers I really loved just because of the harmonies, the polyphonic singing I thought was beautiful. And so my influences are really, really strange probably and broad, and that's why on my albums there's the songs kind of go different places directionally because it's reflective of all my influences. For me though, as long as it's melodic, no matter what the genre is, I'm pretty much interested in it.